The last decoration. The crisp October air carried the promise of falling leaves and pumpkin spice as I scrolled through Facebook Marketplace, hunting for Halloween decorations. My boyfriend James and I had just moved into our first house together, and I wanted to surprise him with a properly spooky homecoming after his business trip. What I found instead would haunt me forever. The listing seemed innocent enough. Vintage Halloween collection. Everything must go. 50. The photos showed an old steamer trunk overflowing with what looked like antique decorations, the kind you might find in your grandmother's attic. But it was the seller's profile that first made my skin crawl. The account belonged to someone named Theodore Wells, created just 3 months ago. His profile picture was a black and white photograph of what appeared to be a Victorian-era Halloween party, the participants all wearing disturbing handmade masks. The only other photo on his profile was of an ancient-looking house with boarded-up windows. Despite my instincts screaming at me to keep scrolling, I messaged him. His response came instantly. Available for pickup tonight only. Must clear out estate. Come alone. I should have blocked him right there. Instead, I found myself texting my best friend Elena. Want to go on an adventure? The address led us to the historic district, where century-old mansions loomed over narrow, tree-lined streets. The late evening sun cast long shadows across crumbling brick facades, and the wind whispered through dead leaves. Number 1313 Raven Street stood apart from its neighbors. While they had been lovingly restored, this house seemed frozen in time, its paint peeling like dead skin. Theodore's messages became increasingly urgent as we approached. Inside the front door. Don't knock. Trunk in parlor. Money on table. Don't open it until home. Come now. Elena grabbed my arm as we reached the porch. Sarah, this is insane. Let's go. But the door creaked open before we could retreat. The parlor was exactly as you'd expect from a Victorian house, except for the temperature. Despite the autumn chill outside, it felt like stepping into an oven. The promised trunk sat in the center of the room, its brass fixtures gleaming in the dim light. No sign of Theodore. Hello, I called out, my voice swallowed by the thick air. Only silence answered. The trunk's latch was secured with a rusted padlock, but a small envelope rested on top. Inside was a single key and a handwritten note. The decorations want to come home. They've been waiting so long. That's when we heard it. The sound of children laughing, somewhere upstairs. But not joyful laughter. This was different. Wrong. Elena was already backing toward the door. We need to leave. Now. I agreed, but as I turned to go, the trunk's latch clicked open on its own. What we found inside wasn't just Halloween decorations. The vintage masks, dolls, and paper cutouts were arranged in a perfect circle around something that made my heart stop. A photograph from 1923 showing a family Halloween party. In the center stood a woman who looked exactly like me, holding the very same decorations we were now staring at. The children's laughter grew louder, closer. Small footsteps echoed on the stairs. We ran. Later that night, after multiple deadbolts secured my apartment door, I researched the address. The house had been abandoned since 1923, when an entire family disappeared during their Halloween party. The only clue left behind was a trunk of decorations, which vanished from police evidence a week later. I thought that was the end of it, until I checked Facebook Marketplace again. There was a new listing from Theodore Wells. Vintage Halloween collection. Everything must go. 50. The photo showed the same trunk, but this time, nested among the decorations, was my driver's license, the one I hadn't even realized was missing. The listing had one comment. They're ready for you to come home, Sarah. It's been 3 weeks. Every night, I hear children laughing outside my window. And every morning, there's a new scratch on my door, getting closer to the handle. Halloween is tomorrow. The last decoration. The 13th hour. Halloween morning arrived with a sound I'll never forget. The mechanical grinding of an antique music box playing somewhere in my apartment. The melody was distorted, like a funeral dirge played at half speed. The thing is, I don't own a music box. I found it on my kitchen counter, a Victorian-era piece with tarnished brass and faded roses painted on the lid. Inside, instead of a spinning ballerina, there was a miniature scene of that Halloween party from 1923. The tiny figures moved in an endless circle, their masked faces turning to watch me as the platform rotated. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "The 13th hour approaches. Will you wear your grandmother's mask?" Grandmother? My hands trembled as I called my mom. "Did your mother ever live at 1313 Raven Street?" The silence that followed chilled me more than any ghost story. "Sarah," she finally whispered, "I was going to tell you when you turned 30. Your grandmother didn't just live there, she disappeared there. And you look exactly like her wedding photo." I slumped against the wall, the music box's twisted melody still playing. My mother continued, her voice shaking. "There's something else." The night before she vanished, she wrote in her diary about finding a trunk full of Halloween decorations in the basement. She said they whispered to her. The music box stopped abruptly. In the silence, my phone chimed with a Facebook notification. Theodore Wells had tagged me in a post, a live video from inside 1313 Raven Street. The camera panned across the parlor where Elena and I had fled, but now the room was decorated for a party. Vintage Halloween decorations covered every surface, and in the corner, Elena sat in a high-backed chair, her eyes vacant, wearing one of those horrible Victorian masks. "Join us." The video's caption read, "The collection grows at midnight. Your seat is waiting." I wanted to run, to hide, to call the police. Instead, I found myself opening the music box again. A small key had appeared inside, attached to a yellowed note in my grandmother's handwriting. "My dearest Sarah, if you're reading this, they've chosen you too. The 13th hour comes only once a century, when the veil is thinnest. The masks show us what lies beyond. I've been waiting so long to show you. We all have. Don't make my mistake. Don't fight it. The trunk must be filled. The collection must be complete. P.S. Check your closet. I left you something." My closet door slowly creaked open on its own. Hanging inside was a white Victorian dress, yellowed with age. A matching mask rested on my dresser. When had that appeared? Its empty eyes seeming to follow my movement. My phone buzzed one final time. Elena's number. "The dress looks beautiful on you, Sarah. Or should I say, grandmother?" I glanced in the mirror. The mask was now on my face, though I hadn't touched it. Behind my reflection, figures in identical masks stood in an endless line, stretching into darkness. At the front was Elena, holding out her hand. Beyond her, a woman who could be my twin, smiled with my grandmother's eyes. The clock struck midnight, though it was only noon. The 13th hour had begun, and somewhere in the distance, a trunk's latch clicked open, waiting to welcome its final piece. I should be terrified. I should be running. Instead, I'm writing this as a warning, even as I feel the mask becoming part of my skin. If you see a listing for vintage Halloween decorations from Theodore Wells, remember, the collection isn't hunting for decorations. It's hunting for collectors. And now, I think I finally understand why my grandmother smiled in that 1923 photograph. Some collections were meant to be joined. Would you like to see? There's still one mask left. The 13th hour awaits. The last decoration. The collection's price. There's a peculiar sensation when your skin becomes porcelain, when your blood turns to ancient dust, and your bones reshape themselves into something older than time. I know this because it happened to me at precisely 12:13 a.m. on Halloween night, as the 13th hour stretched into eternity. But let me back up. You deserve to know how the collection claimed its final piece. After discovering my grandmother's dress and mask, I drove to 1313 Raven Street to save Elena. The rational part of my mind had dissolved hours ago, replaced by the whispers of 100 collectors who came before. They spoke through the mask that had fused to my face, their voices a symphony of centuries past. The house had changed. Gone was the decrepit Victorian mansion. In its place stood a pristine estate, glowing with warm lamplight, exactly as it appeared in 1923. Music drifted through open windows, and shadows danced behind lace curtains. The front door swung open at my touch, releasing the scent of mulled cider and aged leather. Inside, the party was in full swing. Masked figures twirled in an endless waltz, their period costumes swishing across polished floors. I recognized them all from the trunk's photographs, every missing person who had answered Theodore Wells's advertisement over the past century. Elena stood by the grand staircase, her mask now seamlessly part of her face, beckoning me to join them. But something was wrong. In the center of the room, the trunk sat open, and Theodore Wells himself stood beside it. Except he wasn't human, not anymore. His form shifted between all the faces he had worn over decades of collecting. The Victorian gentleman, the Facebook marketplace seller, the antique dealer, the lonely widow. Each mask he had worn to lure new additions to his collection. "Welcome home, Sarah," he said in a voice that echoed with 1,000 others. "You've made us wait so long, just like your grandmother did." That's when I saw her, my grandmother, eternally young, eternally masked, eternally dancing. She paused her waltz and approached me. "There's something they didn't tell you, dear," she whispered. "Something I learned too late. The collection has a price." The music stopped. The dancers froze. Theodore's form solidified into something ancient and terrible. "Every century," my grandmother continued, "one collector must take Theodore's place, become the new keeper, the new hunter." And this time, she touched my mask gently. "This time, it's your turn." I tried to run, but my feet moved to their own rhythm. The other collectors formed a circle around me, their masks reflecting candlelight like tears. Elena stepped forward, holding an ornate key. "The trunk must always be fed," Theodore said, his form beginning to dissolve. "The collection must always grow. And now, Sarah, you will ensure it does." I felt it then, the transfer beginning. A century of memories flooded my mind, every advertisement placed, every collector lured, every mask fused. Theodore's essence poured into me like molten glass, reshaping my soul into something hungry, something eternal. But in that moment of transformation, I realized something that Theodore, in all his centuries of collecting, had missed. Something my grandmother had discovered but could never act upon. The power wasn't in the collector. It was in the collection itself. I reached for the trunk's lid as Theodore's form streamed into me. The masks all turned to watch, their empty eyes gleaming with anticipation. With my last moment of humanity, I whispered the words my grandmother had written in her diary. Not a warning, but an incantation. The 13th hour struck 13, and everything changed. But that's not the end of the story. It's just the beginning. Because now I understand the true nature of the collection, and if you've read this far, you're already part of it. Check your notifications. There's a new Facebook Marketplace listing waiting for you. The trunk needs filling. And this time, I'm doing things differently. After all, some collections were meant to be broken. Want to know more? There's a music box playing somewhere in your house right now. Follow the melody. I'll be waiting. P.S. Theodore never told us what happens when a collector breaks their own mask, but I think we're all about to find out. The 13th hour strikes again tomorrow night. And this time, we're not collecting people. We're collecting freedom. The last decoration. The broken masks. The sound of shattering porcelain echoes differently across centuries. I discovered this at exactly 13. 13, when I broke my mask and unleashed something far worse than Theodore's collection. Freedom, it turns out, has teeth. Let me tell you what happens when you break a mask that's been feeding on souls for 100 years. The pieces don't just fall, they scream. Each shard contains a fragment of every collector who wore it. And they all want to tell their stories at once. I thought I was liberating them. I was wrong. The night I shattered my mask, Every mirror in 1313 Raven Street exploded simultaneously. The gathered collectors, Elena, my grandmother, all of them, dropped to their knees as their own masks began to crack. But instead of revealing their faces underneath, there was only darkness, a void that seemed to breathe. "What have you done?" My grandmother's voice came from everywhere and nowhere. "The masks weren't a prison, Sarah. They were a seal." That's when the trunk began to change. Its wooden surfaces rippled like disturbed water, and from its depths came a sound I'll never forget, the laughter of children, but played backwards, distorted, wrong. The collection wasn't just haunted objects. It was a door, and I had just unlocked it. Theodore appeared one last time, his form now a twisted amalgamation of every face he'd ever worn. "Foolish girl," he wheezed. "Did you think I collected souls for pleasure? I was containing them. Every mask, every decoration, they were prayers, barriers. And now, the trunk's lid slammed open with such force it splintered. From within rose something that had no business existing in our reality. A writhing mass of memories, each one a horror story that should have stayed buried. I saw what really happened at that 1923 Halloween party, why the collection had to start, what lay beneath the house's foundation. Elena grabbed my arm, her cracked mask revealing glimpses of what looked like starlight beneath. "The 13th hour wasn't about collecting," she gasped. "It was about keeping them collecting, keeping them busy, keeping them here." The shadows in the room began to move independently of light. Each one contained a face I recognized from Theodore's century of victims. But they weren't victims at all. They were guards, sentinels, and I had just relieved them of duty. My phone buzzed. A new Facebook Marketplace notification. "Everything must go. The walls between worlds are tissue paper now. Come see our collection. We're dying to show you. All sales final, your soul optional." The listing showed my own face, but not as I am now, as I would be.
As I will be.
The timestamp read, "Posted 100 years from now." The house began to fold in on itself, reality bending at impossible angles. My grandmother approached me, her broken mask revealing the cosmic horror beneath her familiar features. "There's only one way to fix this," she said, holding out a familiar key. "We have to start the collection again. But this time, we're not collecting people, or souls, or even memories." "What then?" She smiled, and in that smile I saw eons. Time itself, because something's been stealing it, and they've almost won. The 13th hour began to chime again, but this time it didn't stop at 13. It kept going, each bell tolled deeper than the last, until the sound became a physical thing that crawled through my bones. My phone buzzed one final time. A message from a number that didn't exist. "The collection continues tomorrow, and yesterday, and 100 years ago. Time is the ultimate decoration, Sarah. Care to help us arrange it?" I looked down at my hands. They were transparent now, showing the swirling cosmos beneath my skin. When I blinked, I saw every Halloween that had ever been or would be, and in each one, the trunk was waiting. Elena handed me a new mask, one that seemed to be made of crystallized time itself. "Some collections," she said, "were meant to be curated, not broken." Behind her, through the mansion's warping windows, I could see other houses on the street beginning to list their own collections on Facebook Marketplace. Each one a door, each one a seal, each one a chance to collect something precious before they took it all. The choice is yours now. Check your phone. There's a new listing waiting. The price is reasonable. Just don't ask what's really being bought and sold. After all, time is running out. Or maybe it's just beginning. Want to know which is true? There's a trunk in your attic you don't remember owning. Open it. We're all waiting inside. P.S. If you see a mask that shows you tomorrow, don't wear it. Wear the one that shows you forever instead. The collection has evolved. And this time, we're not just collecting moments. We're collecting eternities. The last decoration. The final collection, Time tastes like copper and stardust when it bleeds. I've been drinking it for what feels like centuries now, trying to stay ahead of the void that's consuming reality one collected moment at a time. But let me show you how it all ends. Or begins. They're the same thing now. The crystalline mask Elena gave me showed more than just time. It showed truth. Each facet reflected a different version of 1313 Raven Street, stretching across dimensions like a fractal spider's web. In every reality, Theodore had been collecting. In every timeline, my grandmother had tried to break free. And in every version, something vast and hungry waited beneath the foundations of existence. But I saw something else too. Something they all missed. The Facebook Marketplace wasn't just a hunting ground. It was a map. Every listing for vintage collections across the world pulsed like neurons in a digital brain, forming a pattern that had been growing for centuries. Theodore hadn't been the only collector. He was just one node in a vast network of guardians, each tending their own corner of the seal that kept our reality intact, and I had just shattered a crucial piece of it. My phone hasn't stopped notifications since. Each one shows a new listing, but the photos are wrong. A Victorian doll whose eyes follow you through time, a music box that plays the sound of tomorrow dying, a trunk that contains every lost moment of your life, priced to sell. The collectors are desperate now. The masks are breaking everywhere. Elena appeared beside me, her form flickering between times. "They're coming through," she whispered. "The things that live between moments, the ones that feed on linear time." The house shuddered, its architecture rearranging itself like a puzzle box. My grandmother's voice echoed from every mirror shard. "The collection was never about objects, Sarah. It was about possibilities. Each item we gathered was a moment that could have broken reality. We were timeline gardeners, pruning the branches that led to their awakening." The trunk pulsed with dark light, each beat corresponding to another marketplace listing appearing worldwide. Inside, I could see every Halloween that ever was or could be, spiraling into infinity. But in the spaces between those moments, something was looking back. My phone displayed one final message, the final collection, price, everything that ever was, location, everywhere, and every when. The listing photo showed me standing in every possible version of 1313 Raven Street simultaneously, wearing every mask that had ever been crafted. But behind me, a shape was forming from the collected shadows of time itself, something that had been patient, so patient, waiting for a collector to finally break the seal. "You have to choose," Elena said, her form becoming more fragmented with each word. "The masks can be rebuilt, the collection restored, but the price." "What price?" I asked, though I already knew. My grandmother's broken mask floated before me, reforming into something new. "Someone has to become time itself," she said. "Become the ultimate collection, contain all possibilities so they can't devour them." The house was barely holding together now, reality bleeding through the cracks. Outside, other houses were beginning to twist, their own collections awakening. The pattern was spreading. I looked at my phone one last time. The Marketplace app was changing, each listing showing a different moment of choice. In one, I took the mask. In another, I ran. In a third, I was already gone, lost between seconds. But there was one possibility they hadn't considered. I reached into the trunk and grabbed every timeline at once. The mask shattered. The collection scattered. Time fractured. And I became something else. Want to know what happens next? Check your own collection. Those old photos you never remembered taking? That antique watch that runs backwards? The mirror that shows yesterday? I put them there. Because the best collections aren't built. They're grown. From moments, from choices, from you. And now, every time you scroll through Marketplace late at night, looking for vintage treasures, remember, you're not browsing. You're being curated. The collection never ended. It just evolved. And somewhere, in a house that exists in every moment simultaneously, a trunk sits waiting. Inside, there's a mask with your reflection. But it's not showing your face. It's showing your timeline. Care to try it on? P.S. If you see a listing for reality, slightly used, price negotiable, don't click it. That's not Theodore trying to reach you. That's not Elena warning you. That's not even me collecting you. That's them shopping.